And the only peace this world will know can only come from love. Imagine that. Imagine that. Because that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to imagine just that. You may have noticed that over the next few weeks during the Advent season, we're going to be sharing this theme, Imagine. Today we're going to be imagining love beyond measure. We already had a good start. I really appreciate Megan and Shannon. Kind of law firm, almost sounding. And they started us out by them sharing what they imagine love to be. And I noticed that children came up physically and as they were mentioned. And isn't it amazing how much imagination children have? Especially younger children, you just put something in front of them and they can figure out what to do with it. A pebble, a leaf, a bug, something, anything. And their imagination runs wild. It's fascinating to watch just what they can come up with. But us older children, you and I, we have imaginations also. And imagine what we could do. Now imagine if we took this serious. That, for example, the only peace this world will know, the only peace this world will know, can only come from love. I want to share with somebody else that I think had a good imagination. I think you're probably familiar with him. His name is Jesus. And you remember the scripture reading we had today? This is such a great scripture reading. Because if you understand what was going on, there's some significant aspects to this. Yes, we know that the scribe, kind of a writer, if you will, was listening to what was going on. And he heard the scribes, or the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the priests and those who supposedly knew, they were asking questions of Jesus. Sometimes the questions probably were very legitimate, very honest, very sincere, sometimes possibly to trip him up. We know that. But apparently Jesus was answering the questions very well, and the scribe was listening, and he took note of it. So maybe after everybody had gone, then he came over to Jesus and said, "Teacher." He calls him teacher. "Tell me, what do you think is the most important commandment that God would have us do? What do you think?" Now, I think this is a very legitimate, very meaningful, very sincere question. You're aware possibly that there's 613 commandments in the Hebrew Scriptures? That's a lot to choose from. The other day, just for the fun of it, I found a website where I could look at all 613 commandments. Kind of like looking through the telephone directory, I guess, if such things even exist anymore. 613, and some you can imagine were meaningful. You shall love the Lord your God. You shall love your neighbor. There were some very meaningful ones, but also there were some that you just wonder if it was an afterthought. In fact, sometimes it's been said that it's not really that there's 613 commandments, but there's a bunch of commandments and an equal bunch of insights. Insights of, oh, and also do this. But to them, they were all important, because that was how they found the discipline to continue their identity. They could claim who they were. We may not understand them, but they were important to them. So the scribe comes and says, "Jesus, there's 613 of these. Tell me, teacher, which is the most important?" Now, this is where the imagination of Jesus comes in. Imagine what Jesus could have chosen here. Maybe he looked at the scribe and said, "Well, I can tell you don't have very much creativity. I can tell that you're just going through the motions. I can tell that you struggle with life. I can tell that you're tired, you're worn out, so I'm going to make it easy. And maybe come up with number 423 on the list that really doesn't say a whole lot. And the scribe would be kind of happy. Thank you, I can do that tomorrow. That's great. But that's not what Jesus says. He imagines something much, much greater. Do you remember what he said? You shall love the Lord your God, in essence, with everything. With all your might, with all your strength, with all your soul, with all your everything. And, now see, this is the creative part here too. He doesn't just give him one. He can't give him just one. Because right here in this scripture, what Jesus is doing is putting them together and saying, you can't separate loving God and loving neighbor and loving yourself. You can't separate them. If you want to know what's most important, it's this combined, this package deal, if you will. To love God. To love neighbor. To love yourself. Now, why on earth did Jesus think anybody could do that? So there's this underlying foundation that I thoroughly believe Jesus understood. That it starts with love. It starts with this love that we have received from God. I'm convinced that Jesus really was convinced that Jesus, as he lived his life, showed it time and time again that God's love was from everlasting to everlasting. God's love was truly unconditional. God's love was put into us. Now, he's not the only one that's ever come up with that idea. Bill, I appreciate you mentioning Henry Nouwen last Sunday because I've read a lot of his books over the years and he has touched my life as well. But one of the first books was Life of the Beloved. In fact, I gave high school seniors a lot of times a copy. Philip Sheriff last year when he graduated, I gave him a copy of that book. But Henry Nouwen says that understand that each one of us are loved by this God who will not stop. It's not that we earn it, we can't. It's not that we sometimes even understand it. We can't always. We can't measure it, it's immeasurable. It's this love beyond measure. Henry Nouwen understood it. Terry Newcomer, if you caught it in the song, how God fiercely loves all of us. I love that phrase. That God fiercely loves each one of us. It's the way we're built. It's the way we are. Maybe a concrete example, if you want something to play with here, is have you ever bought a car? And you start looking at it, and then the salesperson says, oh, by the way, it has a really good motor. What motor? Well, it comes with a motor. It comes from the factory. I don't see it. Well, it's under the hood. I don't hear it. You have to turn it on. So maybe it has a hybrid engine in it, so you really can't hear it until you press the accelerator. Oh, now I hear it. Could our love be somewhat like that? That this love that we have received is installed in the factory? We come with it. But you know, you have to put the right kind of fuel in it. You have to maintain it. You have to take care of it. But it's there all the time. And I'm convinced that's what Jesus understood, that this love that we have received is already in us. The factory put it in us. And that's just the way we are. So Jesus starts with this understanding. Jesus starts with this understanding that this is the love. Remember the wonderful song, Oh, How I Love Jesus? Because why? Because He first loved me. It's this love that's already in us. And so Jesus comes to this moment with this understanding, with this belief that this love that we have, it's already in us. So what does that kind of love yield? If we have that kind of love in us, what does it mean we're going to do? And that gives him the imagination to say, so, I think you can love God with all of your being. I think you can love the neighbor. I think you can love yourself. Because that's a pretty challenging set of commandments, isn't it? To love God, not just know God or think about God or read about God, but love God. And love your neighbor. Not just, put up with the neighbor. Have you ever had a neighbor that you just kind of put up with? No, love that neighbor. And yourself. We've talked about this before. Sometimes that's the hardest commandment of all, to really understand that we are that lovable, even when we don't even like ourselves. But that's the love that we have received. And so Jesus was firm in thinking that's the gift we have received, this love beyond measure. Imagine this love beyond measure that we have received. Well, that's what Jesus said. What do we say? If we dare to believe that we are loved that much, not because we earn it, not because we understand it, not because we can measure it, but we are loved that much. Imagine what we could do with that. Well, let me share with you a poem that shares some thoughts about what we could do with that. What that might mean in our lives. Aurora Morales is a poet who took the Shema, the Hebrew prayer that comes from Deuteronomy, that's supposed to be prayed in the morning and the evening. And she took that and kind of adapted it, changed it a little bit, and then she added some to it. Listen to this poem and see if you hear some things that maybe we might want to think about. And especially, even though the title of this is not Imagine, I think it could be. Let me read this to you. Say these words when you lie down and when you rise up, when you go out and when you return, in times of mourning and in times of joy. Inscribe them on your doorposts. Embroider them on your garments. Tattoo them on your shoulders. Teach them to your children, your neighbors, your enemies. Recite them in your sleep. Here in the cruel shadow, say these words. Another world is possible. Thus spoke the prophet Dalton. Altogether, they have more death than we, but altogether we have more life than they. There is more bloody death in their hands than we could ever wield, unless we lay down our souls and become them. And then we will lose everything. So instead, imagine winning. This is your sacred task. This is your power. Imagine winning every detail of winning. The exact smell of the summer streets in which no one has been shot. The muscles you have never unclenched from worry, gone soft as newborn skin. The sparkling taste of food when we know that no one on earth is hungry. That the beggars are fed. That the old man under the bridge and the woman wrapping herself in thin sheets in the back of a car, and the children who suck on stones nest under a flock of roofs that keep multiplying their shelter. Lean with all of your being towards that day, when the poor of the world shake down a rain of good fortune out of the heavy clouds and justice rolls down like waters. Defend the world in which we live as if it were your child. It is your child. Defend it as if it were your lover. It is your lover. When you inhale and exhale, breathe the possibility of another world into the 37.2 trillion cells of your body until it shines with hope. Then imagine more. Imagine Imagine rape is unimaginable. Imagine war is a scarcely credible rumor. That the crimes of our age, the grotesque inhumanities of greed, the sheer and astounding shamelessness of it, the vast fortunes made by stealing lives, the horrible normalcy it came to have is unimaginable to our heirs. Don't waver. Don't let despair sink its sharp teeth into the throat with which you sing. Escalate your dreams. Make them burn so fiercely that you can follow them down any dark alleyway of history and not lose your way. Hold hands. Share water. Keep imagining that we and the children of our children's children may live. So let's imagine. No, let's not imagine, let's believe that we have received a love beyond measure. A love that fills us up and gives us potential. It gives us the ability to imagine. And then let's imagine. Let's truly imagine. Because this love that we have received is the same love that we will share. And when we imagine that, another world is possible. Imagine that.